What sort of island would the liberating troops have found when they eventually liberated Alderney?
They wouldn't have known the island before the war, of course, except that many RAF reconnaissance flights were flown over this island to keep tabs on the progress with the construction work. So the island was gradually being covered by a whole series of defence installations linked together, open area obstructed to prevent anti-air landings, the beaches obstructed to prevent amphibious assault, and of course the bunkers that we all see today originally were substantially camouflaged, either artificially or with ground over the top of them. And of course the hardware that they contained and the coastal artillery batteries were fairly prominent on the island. So it was literally a fortified camp.
That's really interesting. Tell me, why, if the island was liberated in May 1945, did it take until December the 15th before the first of the islanders returned?
Well, it was necessary, first of all, to get a full grasp of the situation on the island, and after the Committee of Inquiry was established in April 1945 in London, information was then received from the officer commanding the troops in Alderney as to the full extent of the military fortifications and the state of the infrastructure and the property, and whether it was at all feasible for the civilian population to return. And then it was really not until Sir Philip Neill was appointed Lieutenant Governor in August 45 that he personally drove the forces on the ground, and forming a committee here in Alderney which met weekly to plot the progress with the removal of war detritus and reinstatement of property. And eventually, end of November, the first aircraft again to land at the airfield. It took all that time to remove obstacles and even defence works which are on the present area of our airfield. And at that time, November was the time they sent out the application forms to islanders, and they had less than a week to return them. And of course they wanted, in the first lift as they call it, to include as many people who could form vital posts, opening shops, particularly farming, essential services, to be amongst that first party. And then in successive lifts in 1946, others would return. And 104 islanders returned on that first ship, with a couple of WVS ladies who were already here in force at the beginning of December to help set up the communal facilities to accept the islanders' return.
I know that my mother pestered Judge French and just about everybody else she could pester, because if a boat was coming into Alderney, she was going to be on it. My grandfather was too ill to bring. So my mother, and I'm not sure if both her brothers travelled, one at least did, and they sailed across. My sister was very, very good until the last minute, and then decided she was going to be ill as they came through the harbour. But I think it was, for my mother, it was the sight of the bunkers up on Fort Albert.
Head.
Sorry, I get quite emotional thinking of her. Up on the Bibet Head there, and just underneath Fort Albert, these huge grey buildings that weren't there before. The huge German jetty that had been built and the cranes standing on it. But the thing that she mentioned more than anything was Mr. McCarthy playing the trumpet, which, bless him, Charlie Greenslade has to this day, and playing them into the harbour with his No Place Like Home.
But it must have been quite a shock once they stepped off the autocarrier.
Huge shock. I know that she said they were taken by lorry by trucks up through Bray Road, up through Bray Hill, and that she just could barely see for the debris along the sides of the road as they were taken up to, I think probably the Island Hall first, where the WRVS were looking after them with a cup of tea and refreshments, and then they were billeted at the Grand Hotel where they spent the night with the rats. My sister thought they were Alderney cats.
I remember your sister Patsy talking about that. Yeah, it was very colourful, her description.
Yes, that's right. She remembered well the sounds of them, because of course the Grand Hotel, if you remember, was sort of where the bedrooms were was hollowed. It was above ground. I'm saying above ground. It was hollow. It wasn't a solid foundation, and I think the rats just ran riot there. Mm.
So what was life like? I mean, you were 2 when you returned. In the years afterwards, when you were sort of old enough to remember, what are your first recollections of Alderney?
I suppose all the ruins. A lot of the buildings that were ruined, where the Mignot Memorial Hospital stands now, there were ruins of, I think, maybe farmhouses there. In High Street, because we were in the Campania, which seemed to be constantly being repaired, there were buildings all round us that the roofs, excuse me, weren't particularly complete. The windows maybe had been knocked in. There were just so many places in ruin. I mean, in the 60s, all that changed because they suddenly became deluxe properties. But at that stage, I remember Bray Street as well. That was, it was quite dire, really. But, I mean, when you're tiny, you don't know anything different, do you? You just, well, it's just the way things are. I know I used to be frightened when it was night time. I've always thought there was going to be somebody in the ruins.
When I interviewed you in 2005, you talked very emotionally about the slave labour. What have your feelings changed in any way?
Not in the least. Not in the least. Other than I get very angry about people, various authors who say that the island tried to hide everything. Nobody tried to hide anything. They were coming to terms with being back here and what had happened here, and it took a while for them to discover exactly what had happened here. And it stands to reason that many more than the supposed 400 perished here, and they lived terrible, terrible lives. And thank God the memorial is there and it stands in their memory, and if nothing else, I'm proud of my family for doing that.
How important is it that the island continues to remember the homecoming?
Oh, I think it's so important. I really do. I think Alderney's history is unique. Guernsey and Jersey and Sark, they have their own uniqueness, but they were on their island. They lived on their island, although I know there were terrible losses with people living in England and people living on the island. But to leave your home for that amount of time, not know what on earth was going on over here, and to come back and find it desolate, really. I mean, the amount of people who returned and said we can't stay, and they left again. So I take my hat off to all of those that worked and worked to get this island back on its feet. I wish we had estates who were doing the same thing now.
Well, when we come back, we could see it has been occupied by the Germans and that. And when we come around to the houses and that, Mum and Dad went straight to their place in Burgate Row, number 8, and they lived back in there. And there was 5 of us all in one room because they didn't have a lot. And my brothers and I slept together. There was 3 of us in one bed, and my brother and the youngest one, Jock, was in the other bed. So there was 5 of us in one room.
How would you describe the island?
Well, the island was really down from after all the Germans' occupation, and when we come back to some ruins in the Crabby Bay and stuff like that.
I'm told that, for a child of 7, which you would have been when you returned, that it was quite an adventure playground for young boys and indeed girls.
Yeah, well, when we come back, this place where we're now, the bank was a camp. And I remember seeing the wooden sheds over there. We had 3 of them, I think it was, over there. And along the back here, by the railway, used to be a tunnel with the Germans made, with these big German slabs they made, put 2 across the top and covered it all over with sand. And you could run backwards and forwards through it. And that's when we used to come down here and play, because we only lived in Burgate Row.
How was your house when you returned? Because there have been stories of people coming back and there being no roof on their house.
No, well, Mum's house was okay as far as I know. My sister Doris was telling us that the house was okay. There wasn't no damage at all to it.
How important is it that the people of Alderney remember the homecoming?
Well, they must remember, because all those people that died, through the German war and all that, it's got to be remembered.
How would you suggest that we remember it other than the anniversary of the homecoming every year?
Well, they could do things like put a statue up somewhere to remember all these people that passed away and died during the wars.
That's a good idea. I mean, we do have the Hammer Memorial. Would you suggest that we should do something more than that?
Oh, well, they could have a statue or something of a soldier with a plaque below. Anything which could go in a nice place, could be up at top of Torgee there, just in that triangle on the crossroads.
Do you remember your parents talking about the homecoming?
Well, Mum and Dad never spoke about it too much. My sister Doris mostly used to tell us a few things, And then when we used to be home at night time, she used to teach us how to knit and sew and stuff like that, just to give us something to do through the long evenings.
At age 7, you were, of an age to go to school. What was schooling like in Alderney on your return?
Well, the school was quite nice. It was up in St Anne's, where the museum is now, and we had very good teachers at the time. We had Miss Stewart, Miss Keane, and all them, Mrs Oliver, Mr Leo, Mr Lewis, all them at the lovely school, and they were good teachers.
Gosh, you've got an amazing memory. I couldn't remember the names of my primary school teachers.
You don't forget people like that. And the knit nurse that used to come to do all the school, and that was really good.
How would you describe life back in 1945?
Well, it was very quiet, and on the island you never had a lot to do then. A bit more than what we had now, but we used to make our own fun and go and do games. We used to come down here, play football against the town people. It was Newtown against town, and we used to play football in the field here.
Were there many soldiers, obviously British soldiers at the time?
There was a few soldiers, from what my sister Doris told us, and there were some Germans that stayed behind. And as far as I know, I think Mr Dickie Wellen, I don't know if you ever knew him, he stayed on the island, and he had some lovely photos, because we used to work with him on the boats and all that, and he had lovely photos of the Germans and that on the island, but where they're all gone now, I don't know.
I was only young, but things were still around. All the German huts were still there. I mean, we used to play with the the insulation in these, which was like white crystal-y, I don't know, it would be fiberglass, I suppose. Probably something we shouldn't have played with, but there was so many things we shouldn't have done, but we just did it. You just thought that's what all children did. That was the norm, to play in bunkers, but of course it wasn't. Not for most people, anyway.
I've heard it was, something of an adventure playground for young children.
Oh, yes, yes. I mean, we played in the bunkers, and I mean, even in our teenage years, we had bunker parties, It was just, they were there. I was so young when I came back that I just thought that was how everybody played. Obviously, my parents didn't play like that, but that's how we played, in and out of the bunkers, and it was fun, basically.
Going back to your parents' memories, what stories did they tell you of the homecoming?
Very little, really, because they were so busy working that you only heard odd little clips now and again. Of course, my parents had a bar, and of course the bars stayed open all night. Whenever the last customer went is when you closed. So really very little. Apart from my grandmother used to say that she didn't have a back door when they came back, and of course there were a multitude of rats here after the war, and I know odd people said, oh yes, they used to get £1 a tail for a rat. There was that many. It was very easy to make a little bit of money. But no, my parents really, well, my father never spoke about the war, ever. And my mother didn't really say much. We were just, between working, apart from meal times, you sat down at the table with them, but apart from that, they were all busy working, I'm afraid, like everybody in Alderney. There was no compensation. If I met Angela Merkel now, I would ask her for the money, to be quite honest, because they should have repaid it. It was hard enough when they came back without having huge debts. But my father certainly wasn't the only one. I've heard of other people who'd got loans for vehicles, and the Germans took everything. Took it all to Cherbourg, I believe. But yes, I do know the house was full of paintings that the German prisoners did. I've still got one to this day. Gosh. Because they were worse off than we were, to be quite honest. Yeah. And of course most of them hadn't been in Alderney. I believe some of them had been in Jersey, and they just came here to clear up the island, or help clear up.
So Mum said, now come on, Bede, she says, we've got to go and look where number 1 the hero it is. We haven't got a clue where that is. And where was it? Our own house. But see, we never had one, two, before the war. We were Devonshire House. And, Clarence House, and the Rose and Crown later on, and things like that. Because when we had number 1, we didn't know, we knew it was the hero, but it could have been the other end. And then, as I said, we were lucky, we got our own house back. But when we opened the door, that's when I broke down, because we had a lovely banister where Mum used to be, her and I playing up in the attic, Mum down in the hallway, and she'd shout out to us, your meal is, your tea or dinner or whatever the case may be. And because when we opened the door, that was all boarded up, sort of thing. And then that really got to me. And I don't think it's ever been put back. And then Mum said, oh, I know now why they've given us this bucket and stuff, to get... It was clean, but not properly clean, if you understand. I mean, you could still go and there'd be dust around, but I mean, it was reasonable sort of thing. And then, of course, some of the furniture, the issue furniture was there. So there was a table and there were the chairs, so as we got into that. And that was Christmas Day when we went there. But luckily somebody gave Mum a Christmas cake. And so we had that. So we did have like a bit of a Christmas. So that was the actual first day then on our own. We had to, so-called fend for yourself. So that was the thing now. But I can still see where it looked up there and this lovely banister had gone. Yeah. So that was like the very first thing. But then with me, we came back on the 22nd. I spent the night of the 22nd and the 23rd, but then the WVS, because they were taking part, they were doing different things, and they said, would I mind sleeping in the hospital tonight? Because Miss Colony, you've heard of her? No. Well, then she'd mistook a light, a doorway. Oh, no, which way does it go? She mistook the light for the doorway, and it was a window, and she went down a trench, and so she had to spend the night in hospital. So they said, would you mind? I said, I don't care where I sleep. And because I was about then 17 3/4 there when I got back. So of course then I spent that Christmas Christmas Eve there. Then so I caught up with the family again. And then in the afternoon, Dad had been somewhere, and he says, can you go back to the hospital, Beda, and tell Miss Colony I found her cat? So I said, yeah, okay. So I go back from where we lived, down to the hospital, and I said, Dad's found your cat, but I can't remember whether he said where the cat was or what. So I went down, I delivered the message, come back, and when I got in the house and went into what we call the front kitchen, there was 2 soldiers sitting there, and they'd come down from Château-le-Toc to invite us a few days on to a social evening. So Mum said yes, but who would bring us back? And so George said, the driver who was detailed, or the driver who would be detailed to bring you back, he wouldn't be drinking. So that was all right. Because my mother, I think she worried in case we had a drunk driver bringing us back from Château-le-Toc. And lo and behold, those 2 soldiers sitting there, one of them was George. That was our first meeting on Christmas Day, 1945. And we married in July 47. We got 63 years in. So we didn't do too bad, did we?
You've obviously studied what records are available. How comprehensive are those records?
The military records, which of course are principally at the National Archives, are fairly comprehensive, and that even extends to Enigma decrypts of actions in and around the islands. But as far as rehabilitation of the island is concerned, I've not looked at the precise government archives, although those would be the Home Department substantially. And one has to say that the government committee, which was in charge of resettlement of the island, involved obviously the Ministry of Agriculture, the Postal Services, all those departments of government which would help to reinstate the essential communications and infrastructure of the island. All those records would exist. I've not been through those in any detail at all. And then, of course, the Lieutenant Governor's files in Guernsey includes his correspondence with government and local officials once the island administration was re-established. The States of Alderney actually met in London, ironically in room 101 at the Home Office, and held their first states meeting there after the passing of an order in council allowing them to recover their administrative and executive duties in absentia. So the first states meeting in 1945 was actually held in London.